Welcome to the Best of MBS podcast, a collection of the best interviews hosted by Michael Bungay Stanier, best-selling author of The Coaching Habit and How to Begin. Today's interview is from the Coaching Habit podcast. Here's your host, MBS.
I'm Michael Bungay Stanier. This is the Coaching Habit podcast, where I talk to cool people, writers, thinkers, leaders, managers, just people who I admire, and get them to share some of the insights and tactics that's made their life powerful, that they've used to manage themselves, and they used to help others live lives of impact, doing great work, whatever it might be. So, I'm lucky enough to know some cool people. Some of them even live in my hometown. This guest, Toronto fellow like me, Neil Pasricha. You may know him. He is a popular TED speaker. He's done a couple of talks. His first TED Talk, The 3 A's of Awesome, back in, I think, 2010, ranked as one of the 10 most inspiring of all time. And his second one, which is actually my favorite of the two, more recent, called How Will You Maximize Your Tiny Short Life? It's a great provocative title. But what I love about it is it's the first TED Listen. It's not a TED Talk, but actually he asks questions the whole way through. And those of you who know me know how much I love a good question. Neil has written 5 New York Times bestsellers, which I'm jealous of. This phenomena called the Book of Awesome, which really took the world by storm. But I love his latest book as well, which is called The Happiness Equation. And I'm pretty sure we're going to get into that in this conversation. And before he led the Institute of Global Happiness, for Global Happiness, which is what he does now, and makes a great impact in the world with his keynote speaking, Neil actually spent a decade running leadership development and working directly for 2 CEOs at Walmart, the world's largest company. He was responsible for CEO onboarding, executive development, and talent management across all levels of the organization. Neil, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Michael. How are you?
Very well. I mean, it wasn't so long ago we were having a glass of wine together in one of the bars here in Toronto. This podcast immediately feels like a compromise on that, but it's going to have to do.
Yeah, it does. Well, I love talking to you. You just buried me in lavish praise. And for all your listeners, every time we have talked for 7-8 years, it's been one of my favorite conversations. So I'm excited to chat.
I think you need to get out more often would be my my basis on that. But
yeah, exactly.
You know, we've talked about where you've come from Walmart, from the amazing success of the Book of Awesome and the awesome blog that it was based on. But I'm curious to know, what's the impact you're seeking to have in your work these days? I mean, I talk about the difference between good work and great work, the work that has more impact, the work that has more meaning. How are you thinking of great work for you these days?
Thanks, Michael. Well, I can kind of boil it down to 2 words. And first of all, these things evolve and they change. But the 2 words I'm dwelling on these days are called accessible wisdom. Accessible wisdom. And, I feel like I did that a bit with the Book of Awesome. I did that when it comes to gratitudes and observing positivity. And then with the happiness equation, I was trying my best to make the wisdom of happiness accessible. And so I'm often thinking, and I've been told by others, like, this is your thing. Like, this is like, I'm not going to be the world's best researcher. I'm not going to be the world's best person delivering like white papers to the United Nations. What I'm going to be doing is being able to read 100 of them and trying to pull out the key messages. And in this world of information overload, everything expanding at exponential rates, there's just too much stuff. I mean, how many newsletters are you on? I'm buried in like 17 a day.
Yeah.
And YouTube seems to want to feed me stuff. Google's feeding me stuff. Like the newspapers are feeding me stuff. Like we are just drowning in information. And content can feel so accessible and so easy and so cheap. But good content, clear content, things that are story-based, real-life-based, practical-based, I think are harder and harder to find. So accessible wisdom is what I'm focusing on. And the heroes in my world are people like Nassim Taleb, Black Swan, people like Tim Urban of Wait But Why, people that are taking gigantic things and trying to put them in their own language. And that's what I'm hoping to continue to do.
What made the shift for you, or the kind of the refocus perhaps, from the whole focus around awesome, which I know is still an ongoing theme for you, but moving into thinking about and talking about and making some of the science behind happiness more accessible?
Yeah, you know what's funny? As I read Gretchen Rubin's new book a couple nights ago called The Four Tendencies, and I loved it, and I highly recommend it, and it was amazing. And I noticed in the back in the bio, she described herself as Gretchen Rubin's one of the foremost authorities on human nature. And I smiled when I read that because I've been blogger buddies with Gretchen for years, before the Happiness Project came out, before the Book of Awesome came out, and we were both like plying our trade, trying to like do these small little things. And she's grown. She's written books about habits. She's written books about now this book on tendencies, which is amazing. It's beautiful. And she's just broadened what she defines herself as, human nature. And I smiled because I was like, you know what, maybe we reverse engineer our bios, right? Like you and me
Right.
and everybody else, we just follow crazy random paths of interest and excitement where the bookstore might lead us, where a conversation might lead us, where the functions of time and interesting articles lead us. And then we're like backwards trying to justify them into these squared LinkedIn profiles saying like, oh, and I'm a world's foremost authority in positivity. Like, that's fine. I will answer to that label if people put it on me, but I wrestle with that question because
Yeah.
it's more malleable than that, because it's like, now it's human nature, now it's positivity, now it's successful wisdom. And if you ask me in 5 years, like, I'm going to be working on solving the world's hunger problem, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'll let these interests lead me. But as long as we're led by interest, then I think that's okay. We're not trying to stuff ourselves into these narrow boxes so much.
You know,
So I want to have 12 different bios by the time I'm 50. That's what I'm trying to say.
I love that. You know, there's that Walt Whitman quote he's so famous for, you know, I am composed of multitudes. And there is a sense that as we try and construct our professional selves in particular, how easy it is to kind of hone that narrative so it feels like a single arc of destiny. And I always think our lives are so much messier and so much more multifaceted that it's often a shame to diminish some of that. I mean, it's you and I are both keynote speakers, so we have that moment where we come onto stage and somebody introduces us and they have a pre-written introduction and they say nice things about us. And I just remember a quote from, I think it's George Bernard Shaw, that says something like, never trust a man's biography unless it's filled with intrigue, disaster, and scandal.
Yeah,
And it's that much more interesting. So
totally.
it's a little rant about the power of having that diversity of interest.
Yeah, and you're good at doing that. I love your like Amazon bio where you're like, you know, here's, I got kicked out of school and I got sued and all this stuff. You know, I remember when I was coming up through school, they used to tell you, oh, be careful about gaps on your resume. Do you remember this advice from like 10, 20 years ago? It's like, you know, if you have a year off or blah, 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 like really kind of hide it and be prepared to articulate how you were, you know, searching the Serengeti for, you know, helping to help water. Like you have to like put things around that. Now, I just did a bunch of interviewing myself, and now I'm most intrigued by those gaps, right? Because I'm like, what did you do? Why? And then you get into the root of someone's real personality, and that's essentially what you're hiring. So I say have lots of gaps on your resume and make them messy and interesting and weird, because it's the rise of the new polymath. People want others who are interested in tons of stuff and ideally different than we are interested in, so that we can learn from them.
Very nice. So we've kind of been talking about this, but, you know, there's a quote you've heard me say before, and I'll say it again because I love it. So inspiration is when your past suddenly makes sense. And there's that sense that, you know, looking back, you can see the seeds of your future self if you know where to look. So I'm curious to know, what were one or two crossroads moments for you? Moments where you're like, wow, this has happened, or I've made this choice, or I've been put in this situation. And in doing that, you know, things change significantly for you.
Yeah, I think, do you remember that scene in The Shawshank Redemption where Andy Dufresne, you know, the Tim Robbins character is like, you know, he's digging through the wall.
Yeah.
By the way, spoiler alert for anyone who since 1993 has not seen The Shawshank Redemption, but he gets out of jail and he digs through the wall.
Wait,
and then
what?
there's like,
Oh, man.
it is called Redemption, I guess, in the title. And he digs through the wall. And eventually, like, boom, there's sunlight. And you know, you can kind of picture this guy after like a year of digging through like a clay wall, he gets out. And that's a beautiful moment. I think he's like, you know, rising up to the sky, the rain's coming down on him.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And so I take your question as that sort of metaphor, that tipping point metaphor of when did things kind of bust through. And I use that example of The Shawshank Redemption because almost all of those moments in my life are when I'm just knocking on the same brick wall or clay wall for like 1,000 times till something pops. And I'll give you two examples. These are what you asked me for. One is I read a book by Michael J. Rosen, edited by him when I was a kid. It was called Mirth of a Nation, and it was filled with beautiful little essays, kind of like the New Yorker Shouts and Murmurs section. People like, Dave Eggers, David Sedaris, Jon Stewart, Fran Lebowitz, stars of mine. And at the back it says, if you want to submit your own, mail them to me. Michael J. Rosen at the Thurber House, American Center of All Great Comedy or whatever.
Right.
So I submitted a couple articles and they got published in the next book. And the next book with other people of that stature. Like, I'm not comparing myself to them, but I was in the book with these guys. And I loved that feeling because I'm like, my little funny articles I'm writing for my high school were suddenly selected by this editor to be put in this book that came out way before anything came out with my name on the cover. But it was a proof point. I was like, I can get into this club. And an old boss of mine, CEO of Walmart Canada, used to always tell me, you always think the geniuses are at the next level. Full stop. So until you become a vice president, you think, well, they're all better than me. Then you become an executive and you're like, well, that's where the real money is.
Because now I see who's the executive. Obviously, they're not at this level, so they must be at the next level.
Exactly.
Right.
These people are scum. Like, let me find the real geniuses. So that happened for me once. And then the second time that happened for me was when my 20th blog post ever on 1000awesomethings.com, here I am writing about, fat baseball players and finding $5 in your coat pocket and wearing warm underwear from out of the dryer. I'm writing these things to nobody, right? My mom's reading it. My dad's reading it. Maybe 10 of my friends are reading it. And then my 20th blog post ever gets picked up by Fark.com.
Right.
The dirty secret, of course, is that I submitted all my blog posts to Fark.com, and this is the only one they picked. But they picked it. Yeah. They put it on the front page, and I got 50,000 hits that day. And it was enough of a readership change to be like, oh, I can write to the size of a public audience. And so these are extrinsic, and I don't love using these as examples because they're things that happened to me rather than things I did. But being chosen to get into secret clubs was always nice, a little pat on the head, and it helped me really what the real issue is, gain confidence in myself. And that was always the thing I was struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about it's an interesting point, a place you point, which is around it's in extrinsic. It kind of happened to you. And I do think there's a way that you can make collecting the medals the thing. And if so, you spend your whole life trying to collect the next medal. But there's also a way of saying that collecting this medal is actually a way of reaffirming or maybe confirming something about who you can be. So it can actually, its impact is actually internal, even though you get the shiny medal as well.
Yeah, and you don't want to be the 60-year-old high school football player with a room full of trophies in your attic.
Right.
What you want to do is take that trophy you get and use it as internal juice, some nitro to just fire you up and be like, I can do this. Now what else can I do? And then continue to get closer and closer to your truer passions and let those continue to help you fly. So I point at those two breakthroughs because they're real. But now, hopefully, I need less of those to do what I do.
So moving from those moments of crossroads moments, which were success moments for you, one of the things that I'm always curious about, particularly with people who've had success, and it's very easy to look at you, for instance, Neil, and project a whole bunch of stuff about the great life you have, the way successes seem to come so easily and so early to you, all of that. But what I know from hanging out with people like you and everybody is that we all fight our own fights. And as I become more, if you like, self-aware of who I am, I recognize that there are just constantly lessons I have to keep learning about myself. There are just patterns that I'm probably destined to repeat my entire life, even if I'm doing it in more subtle and different ways. It's the same basic pattern. So I'm curious with you, as you reflect on yourself and your life, what's the hard lesson you've had to learn or maybe you've had to keep learning?
Fantastic question, as always. And there are a lot. And I would never put myself on a pedestal as someone who is doing everything right. I'm not even close to doing half of the things right. I took the compost bag of garbage out this morning and cracked it. It cracked open on the side of the can and went down my leg. I ran to do this podcast. I'm like, I'm sweating. I'm through the pouring rain. It's been a hard day of a lot of rejection. So here's the thing. And I think I shared with you a story personally but not with your listeners, about how I went down to New York City recently, and I was all excited because I did this nonprofit.
Yes, you did tell me this story. Yeah.
So let me share it with your listeners. I did this nonprofit speech for this organization I really believe in, called the Shine Movement. Those of you listening that are in LA or New York or London, I highly recommend getting on the mailing list for the Shine Movement, because they just do great work. Light Watkins and team, awesome job. So I go down and do this, and I'm like, oh, I'll just schedule 5 interesting meetings around this while I'm in New York City. My publisher's there. One of my speaking agencies is there. Talent agency is there. I'm sure the podcast people at Slate want to meet with me, because we've been talking about this idea for a podcast. And you know what? I struck out on every meeting. I literally, they're all busy. And I'm like, don't you know, don't you realize I'm in New York one day? Come on, guys, help me out. But sorry, we can't make it. And I'm like, man, so much failure goes into that. And so I go back to my 3 S's model of success. This is a hard lesson. I think success actually rests on a triangle. There are 3 S's on it. There is social success. This is Moonlight winning Best Picture. Okay. It's critical love. It's reviewed in the New York Times Book Review. It's getting praise from peers. Okay. Then there is sales success. So first one's social, the second one's sales. This is Furious 7 that made $400 million at the box office, but will never win the Best Picture. By the way, Moonlight made $18 million. So it's you see, you can't have both. And sales success is the Book of Awesome, shipping 1 million copies, dump truck of royalties gets backed into your driveway. That all sounds good. And then there's self success. Self success is, how do you feel about yourself? Are you happy building a deck in your backyard for 3 months because it's going to be awesome and you're going to host barbecues? That's fine. You're never going to sell that thing, but it's self-success. Same with baking a cake, planning a lesson, things you do for yourself, or finding meaningful insight into yourself, however you do that.
Right.
The hard lesson for me is remembering that you can't have all 3 of them.
Right.
And being choiceful about which one I'm picking for which project. I may want my next book to be a sales success. I'm okay to admit that to you and to people. But I also you mentioned the TED Listen. That didn't go anywhere. I did it for me. I did that one because I wanted to go through a 6-month journey of coming up with the best questions I could. And that was the TED Listen that, a handful of people watched, right? And that's fine. But I have to be constantly remembering that not everything needs to be a hit as defined by sales. And certainly I have to be more articulate about what I'm actually wanting.
I love that. It's a perfect segue to the next question I want to ask you. I mean, we could dig into this because it's such a rich topic, but just I'm keeping my eye on the ticking clock. The final question I love to ask in this podcast series is, when you're helping someone, when you're giving them guidance, when you're in a place to being a coach or a coach-like or just a friend or a mentor or a colleague, whatever it might be, I'm curious if there is a tool or a process or a model or a resource that you keep coming back to. You've already shared a great one, which is the 3S model. But is there another one that's like a favorite of yours that you're like, I pull this out of my pocket all the time because it seems to have a kind of constant universal impact?
Great question. And what's funny is that when I first heard this question, you told me you were going to ask me this. I was like, man, I'm a real jerk. I don't coach anyone. I was like, I don't help a single person. This is I'm going to have to fake this one because I don't help a person. And then I thought about all my years in HR at Walmart. And if I'm honest, I probably interviewed, 250 people or more. Right. But those are 45-minute to 1-hour interviews in a Walmart buying room, which if you haven't seen it is like a bare bones square room with crappy lawn chairs in it. And you sit across from someone face to face. You've never met them before. Chances are good you won't see them again. And you have to try to see if they're a fit or enough of a fit that you move them forward. So there's a lot of, I think, quiet coaching that happens there. And the biggest thing I would do is say, well, why are you applying for this job? And let's say the job was called director of merchandising for toys. Say the person's going to be buying all our toys. They'd be like, well, I worked 10 years at Mattel and I became my specialty. I'm like, but why? And here's what I do. I'm like, but why do you want to do this job? Well, I think I bring a lot to the table. I think, okay, fine. But why do you want to do this job? What is it about this job that you want? And then they're like, well, I played with toys a lot when I was a kid, and then they kind of, they go slower. And if you did it right, then their eyes start to roll into the top of their head. There's a little longer pause. And that if you can just push another extra why or two without being a without being you have to walk the fine line of not being too oppressive, you know what I mean? Like you can't push them too hard. But if you can be like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? You almost always get to one of two places. And this is the beautiful thing. You get to the place where they have a really deep inner drive to do this, and it's amazing and it's explosive, and they can so define it and they can hit that part, or they realize it's kind of empty in the middle.
Right.
And there's no real reason why they want this job. And the beautiful thing is you don't want to hire that person. And second of all, they don't even know if they want the job anymore.
Right.
So they walk out in a bit of a daze being like,
what
I
happened?
should go throw my application into the local transit commission or whatever I want to do. But the point is, if you just have the patience to push those whys a little deeper, you can get below the pretenses and ideally hit a geyser of passion or a vat of emptiness.
Yeah, I love it. I've heard that process called the ladder of inference, the 5 whys question. And it's funny, in the Coaching Habit book, I'm like, don't ask why. It's not a great question. And I stand by that, particularly in kind of day-to-day conversations. If you're a manager or a leader, asking why can actually often put people a little bit on the defensive. But I think in a conversation like this, it is so powerful for getting down to just a core basic insight, a fundamental truth. And I think that's a really powerful coaching tool. So, Neil, thank you. And thank you for this conversation. People are going to want to find out more about you. So where should they go? Where will they look to find you wherever?
Everything I'm doing is at globalhappiness.org. It's got links to my Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, books, everything like that. So globalhappiness.org is probably the one-stop shop.
Perfect. And I'm just going to give a shout out. Neil talked about, I've got too many newsletters. I get Neil's newsletter about the books he's reading. And he just basically goes, I've read a bunch of books this month because he's a voracious reader. Here are the books I liked. Here's why. And I'd encourage people to, if you're a reader, sign up for that because it's well worth getting Neil's kind of perspective on. These are the books to get your head into. Neil, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Michael.
We hope you enjoyed this Best of MBS interview. Want more great content? Head to mbs.works. There you'll find MBS's new podcast, 2 Pages. You can learn about his best-selling books, and you can join the newsletter. That's mbs.works.
In the advice trap, it's all about learning how to tame your advice monster. If you want to figure out what your advice monster is, you'll find more at theadvicetrap.com.